Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my March and April wrap up. So as per usual, I won't be wrapping up every single book that I read because I do read quite a lot, but I will be telling you about the ones that I have the most thoughts and feelings on and that I feel the most comfortable sharing. So in March I read 16 books and in April I read 15 books, so that is over 30 books, hence why I am not going to be wrapping up every single one. But there's still going to be a lot of books to talk about, so I'm going to go straight into it. So first up we have House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas, and don't worry, there will be absolutely no spoilers in this wrap up. I will not be telling you anything that is spoilers for this book. However, if you haven't read the first book, there may be spoilers because I honestly don't remember what would be spoilers for the first book. So this is the book that has sold me on this series. I really didn't like the first book. I still rated it 3 stars because the last like 200-ish pages were really good, but I felt like the first 600 pages were terrible and it was really slow and boring. But I thought, it's Sarah J Maas, I trust her, I want to give her another book. So I said I would read House of Sky and Breath and that would determine whether or not I'd be reading the third and final book in the trilogy, and I'm going to be reading it. If you've read the book and you know what happens at the end, you'll know why I'll be reading it, but I will not be giving anything away here. So this one I thought was way better than the first book, and I think I rated it 4 stars. It definitely wasn't a 5-star rating, and I definitely thought it was better than the first book, which is why it got 4 stars, not 3. And yeah, I thought it was decent. The pacing was good, and I enjoyed seeing more of the characters. It was a very male-focused book, this one. We followed a lot of the male characters. A lot of the female characters were not very present, but hopefully we will see more of them in the next book. So yeah, this one was good, it was fun. I think the reason it didn't get 5 stars from me was because, again, it's just too long. Like, these books don't need to be this long. There's an awful lot of waffle in them. They could really be cut down. I feel like at this point Sarah J Maas books just sell because they're Sarah J Maas, and so her editors kind of let her get away with a lot. And I feel like if this was any kind of less popular author, this book would have been edited down quite a bit. Also, I found the sex scenes a bit uncomfortable. Like, I thought in like A Court of Mist and Fury and A Court of Wings of Ruin is kind of when Sarah J Maas hit her peak with her sex scenes for me, especially in A Court of Mist and Fury. Yes, it still was a little bit weird at times, but they were kind of normal and enjoyable. And by the time we've got to this book, she's just going off the wall and it's not very interesting a lot of the time. They tend to do it in really questionable places and the descriptions just kind of make me cringe. So yeah, that's part of the reason why it didn't get the full 5 stars from me. And then also, yeah, I just thought there was something missing. It's still not as good as ACOTAR and that series. That's still going to be my favourite Sarah J Maas series. I would say this is probably on the same level as the Throne of Glass series overall, because the Throne of Glass also has books where I was kind of meh and books that I loved. So yeah, I feel like this is kind of that level of enjoyment for me. Next, I read Rafe by Rebecca Weatherspoon, who is an autistic author. So this was a romance, but honestly it kind of leads more towards the erotica side because there isn't a lot of romance to it. Most of it is sex scenes, but it still classes as a romance to me. This is the first book in a duology, and I have read the second book, which I'll be reviewing in a second. This one is about a woman who is a single mother and she needs to hire a new nanny because her nanny is taken off, and she hires a male nanny and has a romance with him. It's fun, it's an easy read, nothing too spectacular, but if you like a romance, it's pretty decent. And I thought it was handled well with the whole like child element things, because sometimes if there's a child in the picture, romance authors forget to kind of consider that element of the relationship, but I thought that was included quite well. So yeah, it was a fun and easy read, but nothing spectacular. Then I read Zenny by Rebecca Weatherspoon, which is the next book in the duology, and that one is about the best friend of the female main character of the first book, who finds out that her aunt has passed away and has left everything to her in her will. So she's got to go back to the town that she came from, and she's estranged from most of her family over there, I think. And so she is there to find her aunt's house and figure out what she's going to do with it. So when Zenny then gets to her aunt's house and reads the will, she finds out that her aunt in her will has tried to set her up with this young man that she was mentoring, and there's this arranged marriage between them and a romance blooms from this fake marriage. And it's also about family secrets and lies and everything coming out. This one was very, very different to Rafe in vibes and had completely different tropes. So if you don't like Rafe, it's also still worth trying Zenny because completely different tropes, completely different style to me. I again thought it was okay. It was less fun than Rafe. There was a lot more serious topics handled in this one, but it was interesting, and it has 2 bisexual main characters and they are really interesting together and makes for some really interesting spicy scenes. yeah, it was fun. It was an easy read, nothing too deep and nothing too surprising, but yeah, again, another kind of average romance for me. Nothing that blew it out of the water, but I still enjoyed it. I also read You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria. This is about two actors who are the main characters in a telenovela series that's coming out. The female main character doesn't actually know how to speak Spanish, but she has always been a telenovela star and has just kind of learnt her lines by memorising them and not really understanding them. And then the other one is a male star who has been a big star in telenovelas in other continents, but he really wants to break out into the American kind of movie scene. And this is with this universe's version of Netflix, so that's why he's really excited for it, and it is about them having this kind of strange romance kicking off as a result of the chemistry that they feel while practicing their lines. This was interesting. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I think I gave it about 4 stars, so it was fun and it was interesting. I enjoyed the tropes. Again, there was a single parent element to it, but I found it a little bit lacking in plot. I think I wanted more from it. It felt kind of stagnant at times, but again, still fun, still an easy read, and still would recommend it. I then read The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, which is another romance. This one is a slow burn romance, which I didn't know going into it, and it was very frustrating. It was my first Mariana Zapata book, so I didn't know what her writing style was, and I have since found out she is very much a slow burn author. So this one is about a professional sports person, professional athlete. I can't remember what sport it is. I want to say it's football, but it might be hockey. I'm not sure. I don't really remember. It's about a professional athlete and his assistant. His assistant then quits at the beginning of the book because she's kind of fed up with working for him. He's really horrible to her, and she thinks she'll be able to do stuff by herself because she now has her own business. But then he gets in touch with her and says that he really misses having her around, and he is a Canadian citizen but lives in America, and his citizenship is up for like renewal. I don't know, his visa's running out or something, and basically he wants to find someone to have a fake wedding with so that he can have a long-term residency in the US. So he asks her if she will fake marry him and stay with him for a few years so that he can get his residency, and she agrees. And it is about the early days of their fake marriage and them actually falling in love. It was okay. It was a very frustrating read, and I enjoy slow burn, but I feel like it wasn't as well done as other slow burns I've read. Like, Chloe Leese is the queen of slow burns for me, and what I like about her is she teases you, gives you a little bit of spice, and then pulls it back and keeps bringing them together and apart. But this book didn't feel like it did enough of the bringing them together for a brief moment before pulling them apart. It was just very frustrating to read. It was fun, but it could have been better for me, and I don't think it's made me want to read any more Mariana Zapata books, but we will see. Then I read A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria, which is the sequel to You Had Me at Hola. So this is a best friends to lovers romance, and it's also kind of a second chance romance, but they never actually dated properly. And it's about 2 young people who are struggling with the point that they're at in their lives. We have the male main character who, as soon as he was old enough, he left his family in the Bronx and moved to LA and set up a really thriving gym there with his friend, which is now becoming really successful, and the stakeholders want him to come and open a new one in New York. But he doesn't really want to do that because his parents still live there and he's been avoiding them since he left, but he decides he has to come and do it. And then the female main character has recently burnt out on her career, and she's decided to try and set up her own business doing marketing and building websites for people. And he reaches out to her asking for help with the marketing for his gym, and when he comes back they end up having to spend time together a lot more than they anticipated and start to see the sparks fly. This one I felt was a lot more slower burn than You Had Me at Hola, and I enjoyed it, but it felt kind of awkward for me because I struggle with these romances where they were supposed to have all of this chemistry before and then it's been several years and they come back and suddenly the chemistry's just there instantly, which is what this was like, but you don't get to see the initial part. Like, the authors never seem to give you that initial part, so I find it really hard to invest in the romance if I haven't seen it blossom. And when they cut the part out for me, it just made it really hard for me to invest in them. It was a fun and easy read. I felt like it dealt with a lot more serious topics, or was a lot more serious than You Had Me at Hola, but I still enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3 stars, maybe 4. I still would recommend it if you like those style of romances. It just wasn't like the best for me, but I still would read more from Alexis Daria. Then I read The Secrets Act by Alison Weatherby. This is a historical mystery slight thriller with a romance element to it as well, and it's young adult. So this one is set in Bletchley Park, which is where the code breakers in World War II worked to break the German Enigma machine in the UK. If you've seen The Imitation Game, that's where that is set. So this follows two young women who work at the park. Pearl is a 16-year-old messenger who rides around on her bike delivering messages from building to building on site, and then Ellen is new to the camp and she is there to be a code breaker, and they form an unlikely friendship between them. And then one day their mutual friend Richard is found dead, and they decide to try and find out what really happened because they think the story of him crashing his motorcycle by accident isn't true. And this helps them to build their friendship, but also makes them very suspicious of everyone else around them. I loved this book. So we have autism rep in Ellen. It's not on page, but the author has said that Ellen is autistic, or is coded autistic, or is kind of has autistic traits. But back then autism wasn't diagnosed. So that's why it's not on page. She wouldn't have that language because the language didn't exist. I really enjoyed this one. I don't read a lot of thrillers or a lot of YA these days, but YA thrillers are the things that I would pick up if I was feeling like some YA, so I really enjoyed picking this up. And I thought the mystery element was really well handled. I kind of predicted a little bit of it, but not all of it. There could have been a few more red herrings for me, but it wasn't that I didn't enjoy it. I kind of got a bit of satisfaction from figuring it out. I just didn't figure out the whole story of what was going on. I thought the characters were really, really well done and really distinct, because sometimes when you get two POVs of the same gender, the authors aren't always very good at distinguishing between the two of them, but I found it really easy to tell when I was reading Pearl or when I was reading Ellen, and I loved them both. Then I also read The Revelry by Catherine Webber, which is the YA name for Katie Zhang, I think is her. Am I getting that right? Yes, Katie Zhang. So she writes the Dragon Mountain and Sam Wu series with her husband Kevin. So if you know those middle grades, then this is her, but her YA name. So The Revelry is an atmospheric, kind of a thriller, kind of a horror, but not really anything of those either. It's just very atmospheric and kind of folklore-y. And basically this is set in a small town where every year this thing called the Revelry happens. And a certain year of school you will be sent on the Revelry, and it basically happens in the middle of the night in the forest. So one year these two best friends decide to try and sneak into a revelry that isn't theirs, and they manage to do it. And after the revelry it appears that they have been tied together by fate, where when one of them succeeds the other one begins to fail. But the one that succeeds doesn't believe that this curse has happened because her life is going great, but her best friend feels as though they have been cursed, and that the only way to undo the curse is to try and undo her friend's successes as well. And this is such an intense but really short read. So if you are looking for something super atmospheric and super creepy, pick this one up. I really, really enjoyed it. I kind of figured out some of the twists again, but not all of them, and I found you read it more for the atmosphere than the plot than anything else, because the atmosphere is what keeps you going and makes you want to keep reading it. And I really enjoyed how every character is really distinct and everyone had a really strong personality, and the town and the forest itself kind of felt like they were becoming their own characters. Now, the final book I'm going to be talking to you about for the March reads was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So I have read Eve Brown, and that was my first Talia Hibbert book, and that is the third book in the Brown Sisters series. So I thought eventually I needed to go back and read books 1 and 2. So here I am. And I love this one. I did actually try to read this ages ago, and I DNF'd it with the intention of going back to it because I wasn't feeling it at the moment. And I picked this up and I honestly have no idea why I wasn't feeling it. I loved it. So this one is an enemies to lovers romance, except both of them thinks that the other hates them and they don't hate them, and it's just really funny. So this one is about Chloe, who lives in this apartment block. She has fibromyalgia, so she struggles sometimes but is coping quite well living by herself with the support of her family. And then you have Red, who is the kind of, is it superintendent? I think that's what they call him. He's kind of like the maintenance guy for the apartment block, and he also lives there too. And he used to be in an abusive relationship, and he is an artist, and basically after his relationship ended he stopped making art and he wants to get back into it again but doesn't know how. And it's about them kind of being forced together because he needs a website and she needs some extra support. So they kind of come up with this exchange of that, and then a romance blooms. I loved it. I thought they were so cute together, and I loved seeing them tease each other and wind each other up, but also just genuinely look after each other. Like, there's so many moments in this where they just are so gentle and kind to each other, and it is such a heartwarming read. So it should be no surprise that my first book of April was Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the second book in the Brown Sisters series, which means I have then read the entire series of it. And this one is about the middle child, Dani Brown. Dani is this really eccentric, out there woman, and she works at a university. I think she's a PhD student, but she also works there too. And she has this unlikely friendship with the security guard of one of the buildings, and he is very grumpy, doesn't have very many friends, and from his perspective you find out that he used to be a professional rugby player, but after his dad and his brother die in an accident he quits and is now working in security, and he's trying to keep it a secret who he is. But one day he saves Dani from what he thinks is a burning building, and the video goes viral and people figure out who he is, and he asks her to fake date her to help improve his image because he is running a charity. And romance ensues, as you would expect from all of these romance novels. This one might be my favourite of all of the Brown Sisters books. I don't know, maybe Eve Brown is, but this one I liked more than Chloe. And I liked it because they are already friends, and I love a friends to lovers romance, and they are so cute together. Again, they spend so much time looking after each other, and I really liked that it is a book about them already having learn enough about themselves that they are learning to grow together rather than trying to get each other to change. Then I read Everything for You by Chloe Leese, which is her latest release, and I'm not sure if it will be out yet by the time this video goes up, but I read it as an ARC and I loved it. So this is her first MLM book in the Bergman Brothers series, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. So this is another enemies to lovers romance, and it is about two football players who are on the same team. And when I say football, I mean soccer, because it's in America. But you have one who is in his 30s, and he was really famous over in the UK and a really popular player, but now he's kind of getting old, which is why he's come to America to play in the league over there where it's a bit easier, and he is the captain of the team. And then you have the Bergman, who I can't remember his name. There's too many Bergmans. I want to say it's Oliver, and he is one of the youngest Bergmans, but not the youngest, and he is one of the youngest on the team. He left university to be part of this team, and he is about to be made co-captain, and the current captain is not happy about this because they have been enemies since they both were on the same team, but secretly they are crushing for each other, and they also happen to be next door neighbours. And so this captainship and them being neighbours is forcing them to be more civil to each other and to form a friendship and later on a relationship. It's really fun, a really nice read, but it deals with a lot of interesting topics about chronic pain and illness and what it means to have to give up your dreams and things like that. It's a slight age gap romance, but not a huge age gap. And yeah, it's really fun, really funny, but really emotional too, just like every Chloe Leese book, and of course it is a slow burn, so prepare yourself for that. Then I read The Bride Test by Helen Huang, and this one I did not like. So this was a 2-star rating for me, and if you like this book, I ask that you stick around to find out why I'm rating it 2 stars. So Helen Huang is an autistic author, and this is from the Kiss Quotient series, and the Kiss Quotient has an autistic main character as well. So in this one we have the autistic main character Kai, and he believes he doesn't have feelings, he can't feel love, can't be in relationships because of this, and has always isolated himself, and his mother's kind of tired of that and decides to set him up with a girlfriend. So she goes back to Vietnam to find him a wife, and while she's there she meets Esme, and Esme is actually just a cleaner at the place that she's interviewing other potential wives, but she finds something in Esme that she really likes and offers for her to come live in America, earn some money, and hopefully fall in love with her son. And the deal is that she has booked a wedding for August, and they have until then to decide if they want to go ahead with it. It sounds really fun, and it sounds really interesting about this woman making a man realise that he does feel love and proving it to him, but honestly it was so problematic it hurt. So the autism rep, amazing, really good. And I feel like a lot of autistic people struggle with that feeling that they don't feel certain feelings or particularly love because their feelings are expressed and manifested in different ways. That was all fine. I thought the autistic rep was actually really good. What I didn't like was everyone else in this stupid book. So the thing that really frustrates me is that people can tell that Kai is depressed and there's something going on with Kai and that he is not happy and that he needs help or something, and they don't actually care or try to do anything about it until it affects Esme. And Esme is negatively affected. They just honestly don't care about him. And they decide, oh, he feels like he doesn't have feelings. Let's get him into a relationship, rather than maybe talking to him about that or helping him see that he does or getting him some therapy. Like, it's just so bad. And like, everyone in this book just cares about Esme. No one cares about Kai. It's really depressing. And it's not until things go wrong for Esme that anyone tries to help Kai. And also, what I found really frustrating in this book was Esme herself. I did not want her to end up with Kai. She was horrible for Kai, because he was clearly in love with her and was trying to help her as much as he could. And at one point she is told by one of the other characters that Kai is autistic and is a bit different to everyone else, and her thoughts, because you're in her perspective at this time, is like, autistic, I don't know what that means, and then just moves on. You have Google. Like, she's going to school to learn English, and so she clearly has that mindset of learning, and yet she doesn't Google what this thing someone said her husband or potential husband is. And she just carries on, and she goes on about how strange he is, about how awkward he is, about how she feels like she doesn't know him, while never making an effort to talk to him about anything or get to know him. She just constantly tries to do everything for him and makes all these gestures without ever asking him about what he wants or what he likes. And it's so frustrating, because she's then painted as like a martyr for doing all of this, and like she's the good guy because she's trying. And I just, oh, it made me so mad, because this is the reality a lot of autistic people face, is people not wanting to incorporate the fact that they are autistic into any of their own actions and treating them like a neurotypical. And that's what this entire book was, and they were lauded for it. Like, I do not recommend this book. I genuinely think it's bad. And when so many people were DMing me being like, oh my god, I can't believe you're reading this. This is my favourite one in the series. I hope you like it. And now I'm like, why? It makes me scared sometimes that people love that kind of romance and that kind of relationship, when I feel like if that was me, I'd feel very manipulated and hurt by how people were treating Kai in this book. Then I read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, and that was an audiobook that's been on my TBR for a really long time, and it was just a bit of a letdown. I was expecting so much more, and I was expecting to feel more interested and engaged. And honestly, if it wasn't an audiobook, I would have DNF'd it, because it wasn't worth the effort of listening to it on its own. But I tended to listen to it while playing games, so it kind of made me get through it. It's okay. So this one is about a white woman who hires a black nanny, and she calls her in for an emergency like babysitting session because her husband has had an emergency at work. And so she then asks the babysitter to take her little daughter out to the supermarket to keep her distracted. And while the nanny is in the supermarket with the daughter, she gets stopped by security, who thinks she's kidnapped her. And it's about what happens after that incident. So there is a slightly romance with someone who saw all this happen at the supermarket. Then there is the reactions of the white mother of what's happening, and her trying to prove that she's an ally and that she is a good person. I'm trying to then make friends with her babysitter when she's never made that effort before. And then there's the perspective of the babysitter, who is like, this is just my everyday, I am not really that bothered, I just want to move on. And it's interesting because there is that element of, from the white woman's perspective, it feels very creepy. She is obsessed with her babysitter from this point, and she is obsessed with her babysitter because of the colour of her skin, and she feels this need to prove that she has black friends and to try and make her be friends with her so she can have another black friend, and to prove that she's an ally. And even though the babysitter repeatedly says she doesn't want to do anything, the white mother keeps trying to push her to do things that she thinks would be good for this situation. So it's a very interesting read in that sense, but it is a very, very slow book with not a lot happening, and I just felt like it could have done a bit more to keep me engaged. But I thought the messages were really interesting, and it's definitely one that will get you thinking. So if you're interested, definitely still give it a go. The next two I'm going to be talking about together, and that is because I read The Tattooist of Auschwitz and then Silke's Journey, and I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to try and condense it down. So The Tattooist of Auschwitz, if you haven't read it, then you really, well, for both of them, you really need to look into the context that you're reading them in. So The Tattoos of Auschwitz is based on a true story. It's based on interviews with a man named Lale who was in Auschwitz, and he is telling his story to a screenwriter in his 80s. So the difficulty is she doesn't make it clear that there will be historical inaccuracies, because she kind of tries to hide behind the fact that it's all Lale's stories. This is what Lale told her. But she doesn't seem to ever acknowledge the fact that when you're in your 80s, you're not going to remember very clearly things that happened to you in your 20s in as much detail as Lale went into. And that is an issue that the Auschwitz Museum, I think it was, called her out on and said that there's so many historical inaccuracies in this book because of the fact that it's based on a very old man's memory, and also that some of the things in it is kind of downplayed, like the horrors of Auschwitz are very downplayed in this book. So if you're going to read it, make sure you read it with that context in mind and look into maybe reading some of the reports about what people have said about the historical inaccuracies and things like that. And I did that before reading The Tattoos of Auschwitz. It was an interesting read. I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the romance side of it, and it was quite interesting to hear about the perspective of someone. So he was a tattooist, and basically he hasn't told his story for so long because he was worried he would be accused of being a Nazi sympathiser or conspiring with the Nazis because of his role in the camp. It was very interesting hearing from that perspective, but I didn't rate it because of the inaccuracies and because it is his true story. Then we have Silke's Journey, and this one makes me a lot more uncomfortable because I'd already bought this before I looked into it because I didn't know there were controversies around it, but after I heard about the controversies of The Tattoos of Auschwitz, I then made sure to look up Silke's Journey before I read it, and you really need to for this book because this is about Silke, who is a character in The Tattoos of Auschwitz, and she was friends with Lale in real life and was in the camp with Lale and his wife. This is not based on Silke's retelling of her own story because Silke had passed away by the time this book was written, and so this is based on what Lale told the author and then on what the author found through research. And Silke's family have very much said that this is not her story, this is not what happened to her, so much so that her husband asked to not be in the book. So the character that Silke ends up with in the book has a different name, and it's portrayed in both books that Silke survived by being a mistress for one of the camp guards and then gets sent to a Russian camp after the war as a prisoner for punishment for that, because she's then accused of being a Nazi sympathiser, and her family have very clearly stated that that's not what happened, that is not what Silke was like, and the author decided to write it anyway. So I wouldn't really recommend reading Silke's Journey because it was not told by Silke and her family really objects to it. I read it and I was reading it the whole time feeling like this doesn't feel like something she should have written without permission, so I didn't rate it, and I do regret reading it, but I had already purchased it before I heard about all of this, so I decided to read it anyway, and yeah, those are my thoughts. Then I read Perfectly Preventable Deaths by Deirdre Sullivan. This is set in Ireland and it is a suspense, thriller, fantasy kind of style thing with slight horror elements to it. It's about two sisters and their mother who move in with their stepfather into this castle in Ireland. And the whole town is a little bit strange and there's strange things going on. And there's a woman living in the basement who I think is their new like step grandma, who is a witch basically. And I can't really say much about what this story is about other than that there's women that go missing in this town and no one has ever really known why. Because this book, not a lot happens until the very end, which is my issue with it. I do actually want to read the second book because I feel like it'll be really interesting. But the first book I felt like was a very extended prologue for the second book with nothing really happening until the very end. It was okay and it was very atmospheric, but I wanted more from it. Then I read Stacey Dooley's autobiography, which was called On the Front Line with the Women Who Fight Back, and it is not truly an autobiography in more that it's her explaining the backstory behind a lot of the documentaries that she's made. If you've watched all of her documentaries like I have, then you won't take much new away from this, but it is still interesting to hear her thoughts, what was going on while she was filming these documentaries. So if you don't know, Stacey Dooley is a documentary presenter in the UK. She's from a very humble background. She became a documentary presenter because she was a contributor on a show where they sent ordinary fashion lovers from the UK out to work in the sweatshops in another country, I can't remember which country it was, to experience it firsthand. And the producers really liked her on the show and would often get her to be the one to give thoughts and to speak, and she was the one that would be asking questions going on, and they saw a spark in her, which then led to her having her own presenting career. And she's done some really incredible presenting and really incredible documentaries and has really looked into the focus of women and children and their persecution around the world. It's an incredible career to have had, and it is so interesting to read about. If you haven't watched her documentaries, it's very worth reading because she has some really interesting thoughts. And if you have watched them, I think again it's still worth reading because she talks about how each individual experience impact her worldview and her thoughts on things, and I thought that was really interesting. Next, I read Life Ceremony by Circa Murata, which is a collection of her short stories. And this collection of short stories, I believe, was originally published in Japan before Earthlings, but isn't published in the UK until now. So there are some stories in this that are kind of preludes to Earthlings, which was really interesting. So it's a collection of short stories that focus on humanity, what it means to be human, and those kind of things. It's hard to explain because each is so individual. I found it really interesting and I really enjoyed reading them. It's definitely one to look up trigger warnings for if you need them, and I would say it's fairly similar in trigger warnings to Earthlings. So if you've read Earthlings and you enjoyed it, then you'll probably like Life Ceremony, but if you've only read Convenience Store Woman from Sayaka Murata, then you really need to look into the trigger warnings or go in prepared for Life Ceremony because it's a lot darker. And I enjoyed it. I found it really got me thinking, and I don't know, I just found it really good. I was constantly reading it thinking, what was the message behind this? What is she exploring? And there's a lot of interesting topics about life and death and humanity. The final book I want to talk to you about, and it was the last book I read in April, that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. So this is a buddy read, and that's why I only actually finished it on the first day of May, but most of it was read in April. And I didn't enjoy this one as much as I thought I was going to. So I haven't rated it yet, but I think it's probably going to come out as a 3-star. If not, it's like a 3.5. And I don't know. I thought this was going to be more fun than it was, but my issue with this is I hated Delilah for most of the book. And she was my least favourite character except for her sister Astrid for the whole book. Those two annoyed me, but she was more annoying for more of the book. So this one is about Delilah. When she was a child, her father remarried after her mother died, and then 2 years after they remarried, her father passed away. So she was then raised by her stepmother, and her stepsister was in the picture as well, who was the same age as her, and she always felt as though she was unwanted and a kind of a spare part. Her stepmother didn't really like her, and at 18 she moved out and moved to New York and has been trying to make it as a photographer ever since. And then the other perspective you get is Claire, who is the stepsister Astrid's best friend, and she has always had this perspective of Delilah closed herself off and could have been part of their little friendship group if she'd wanted. And so she's always had this weird feeling about Delilah. But when she was 18 years old, she accidentally gets pregnant and has a child. And so now she has a near teenager. In the present day, Astrid is getting married. So she asks Delilah to come back and be her photographer for the wedding. And while she is there, she has a romance with Claire. I loved Claire. Claire and her daughter Ruby deserve the world, and I love them so much, and I was rooting for them the most out of this whole book. And the chemistry between Claire and Delilah was amazing. The sex scenes were great, the romance scenes were great, like they were really cute together and I loved them. And Delilah and Ruby were amazing together. But Delilah's attitude in general just really grated on me. And what I found annoying was she's nearly 30 years old and she kept going on about how she's so mature or she's so grown up because she's 30 now. And yet she was acting like a child, and I almost felt like I was supposed to agree with her acting like a child in this book, and I really didn't. I really didn't root for her because I just found her so annoying. I wanted to give her a slap and tell her to go to therapy, honestly. It had a really nice resolution, but when you're only rooting for half of the relationship, it's hard to be invested. So yeah, this only came out as a 3.5, but I am glad I read it. So those are most of the books that I read in March and April. I had a really mixed month, but I had some really great reads in there, and I'm looking forward to reading some more soon. Let me know how you did in March and April. Let me know what your favourite books were, or if you had any least favourites, just let me know your thoughts. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are down in the description below. If you want to leave me a comment to let me know you are, if you want to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me a tent emoji in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Bye!